Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. I'm Mindy Grace and this is my channel, Girl of a Different Era. And wow, I've had some busy couple of weeks working on my first custom order dress. And if you guys are new to this channel, I posted my first video in that series last week, and that was about trying to make the mock-up. That's quite an adventure. But I'm finally done. Yes, I am so relieved, and I'm ready to take a break, recharge, and think about some new projects as I'm recharging, you know. But anyways, today we're going to be talking about making the bodice, and that was a challenge. And I mean, we're going to go through the entire process. So yeah, I'm really glad you guys stopped by and that you're going to watch this video. Right into the process of making a Civil War era inspired bodice. So yeah. We are starting off, I am just cutting out my interfacing for the project, or I should say pinning my pattern on the interfacing, but that's pretty much what we're doing here. I'm just cutting out those pieces. And we had I had three different layers to cut out for the bodice, and that was out of the interfacing, out of my fabric that's like on the outside, and then out of the lining. So yeah, here I am cutting it out of the beautiful yellow, I want to call it silk brocade, but I know that's not the correct term. But anyways, I'm cutting it out. And I do have to apologize for the weird sunlight. Let's just call it abstract art and be good with it, okay? Yeah. And then here I am. I've just got my bodice pieces pinned to my lining fabric, which is just a white sheet that I got at a thrift store. And I really do recommend this for all you costumers and costume makers who do not happen to have a lot of money. Sheets are amazing for lining. Just go with them, is my advice. Okay, and now I am pinning the interfacing to my outside layer of fabric, and as annoying as this was to do, you know, like so much more stitching, I really liked it in the end because it made it so much more stiffer because this fabric just wanted to catch. And then I'm just sewing that right down. And my thread broke a lot during this process. Don't use polyester thread if you can help it. Seriously, it caused me a lot more of a headache than I should have had with this project. Okay, now I'm just pinning my back pieces together after I've sewn on all the interfacing to them. And this is when the project starts looking fun because it's sort of getting shape to it. And now I am just doing that again. Just, you know, keep doing it. And like again, it starts feeling a little bit more like a bodice at this point. And here I am just pinning the two different shoulder seams together so I can start connecting sort of the front panels to the back panels. And if you are using a pattern that you sort of altered and designed yourself, it really helps to mark on which piece is the back and which is front. And now I am just brought those to my sewing machine, and I am just sewing them down. And again, looks like we've got more seams. There was a lot of seams to the bodice, and at one point I was asking myself, so look, why is there so many seams? Like I could just cut like a big piece of fabric, but then you realize you just don't get the shape out of like 2 pieces of fabric as you get out of like 7. So that's really why. And now it came to the lining. I'm just sped this really fast because you guys already saw me doing it with the front pieces. But it's the same exact thing. You just do the same exact thing with the lining as you did with the front, except for the interfacing. And that actually in a way is nice when you're doing a project like this because you've already done it before. You can kind of just let your mind go on autopilot as you do it again. I'm not quite sure what happened to my finger. I think I cut it at this point, and I was trying to make sure it wasn't going to bleed on the white fabric. Okay, now it came to the boning. This was actually kind of fun. I've never really worked with boning before. And so right here I am measuring the channels that I'm going to be putting down, and then just cutting those out after I finally get the measurement. This is a bit of a tedious process. There's a lot of measuring going back and forth, especially when the thing you're measuring does not just like lie nicely flat. But, I mean, it gives you something to do, and I did enjoy working with boning and the fact that it gives structure to the bodice and kind of keeps it upright and gives it a slimming effect. I like to call it the internal corset, though it really doesn't act like one, but it just reminds me of one with the boning. So now I'm measuring the back place I'm putting the boning on, and that one's longer. And the key with the measurements is after I finally get the ones I want, I need to start by trimming it, which you will see me doing in just a moment here after I stop fiddling with this boning. Okay, now here I am, and I am just measuring 5/8 inch away from the end of my boning, peeling back the coating on it, and then just trimming that away. And now it's time for the placement. So this is again the back place that I'm putting it, and I'm just measuring that in place, making sure I've got 5/8 inch on each end. And so then I'll be able to, sew it to the bodice. And now I'm just, you can't quite see because my shoulder's in the way, but I'm just pinning that right down. And that's the handy thing with buying covered boning, is the fact that you do not have to worry about covering it yourself, and you can just like pin it right down. I ended up buying like 10 yards of this stuff, so let's just say I'll be using it for quite a long time. I do want to note at this point, I did not get this on film, but I ironed out my boning because it was all weirdly coiled up because that's how it was shipped. So if you got plastic boning and it's not going to lie flat for you, just take the iron to it and it flattens beautifully right out. So that's just a trick if you find yourself in that situation. Okay, now it's to the sewing machine, and this can be brutal with polyester thread. Like I said, don't use it if you can help it. My thread kept breaking at this point, but I mean, it was really fun, like after it was sewn down, to see what it looks like, and that's what I'm showing you guys right here. All the neat boning channels just sewn right in to the lining. And now I'm just curling 5/8 inch of the edge up and then ironing it down. And this actually wasn't, too hard of a process, and definitely do it at this stage and not like future ones. The hardest part here was the boning and hoping that I measured it right. And some of it wasn't quite 5/8, so it was too much, but hey, it all worked out. It all worked out. That's the important part. And now I am stitching right sides together my bodice to my lining, or vice versa. And this is the very exciting part, because when you're done with this, you can flip it inside out and kind of get a feel of what it's actually going to look like. Oh, there's my thread. It just broke. See me having to re-thread it? That was my life for like 1 week. So yeah, I'm just right sides together, stitching along it, and yeah, this is actually kind of fun to do. And now I am doing something that's called understitching. So I'm like stitching the edge of my lining to the seam allowance of the seam I just sewed, and this helps the lining to like lie flat and not like weirdly poke out of the bodice. And yeah, I'm pinning the arm seam, which I later on took to the machine and just basted 5/8 inch on that, you know, to keep the lining where it should be and in the place it should be. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And now it came time to work on the sleeve. And here I am just sewing the sleeve, like the sleeve attachment where they connect. I've just folded it over and I'm sewing that down. And now I'm sewing 1/2 inch around the edge, so I know exactly where to fold it up to hem the edge of the sleeve. And I'm just trimming. I've curled up the 1/2 inch on my sewing line, and I'm trimming it down really close. Just trim it very closely down. And then I am just folding that up into what I call a double hem. I really don't know the correct term for it actually, but that's what I call it. So yeah, I'm pretty much just folding it over so the raw edge is encased. And now, instead of doing elastic, I decided I wanted to do a ribbon threaded through to pull it. And that is, I'm just measuring out some twill tape that I'm going to use as my casing, and then measuring the placement on the sleeve. This way, although this dress is totally not historically accurate, I thought I would do it just for the sake of doing it, I guess. Maybe to make it look more accurate, I don't know. So I'm just measuring the placement of where I'm going to put that casing for my ribbon on my sleeve, and just making those marks and then connecting them on the wrong side of the fabric. Always do the stuff on the wrong side, otherwise who knows if the pencil mark will come out. And I took it to machine, and I am just stitching down that casing. And you can see me I sewed a buttonhole for the opening of my casing, and you can just see me right here opening that right up. I've got my ribbon on a twist tie, and this can be a very fiddly process, and I'm just beginning to thread it through. I really do think this probably be a better casing to use than twill tape, but it's just what I had on hand, and so I used it. And as you can see, this is a very fiddly process, getting it to go right in. But I'm pretty much reached the end thanks to being able to fast forward and chop videos. And I'm just trying to get that end out, which at one point I did lose it and had to be threaded. But just pulling that out so they're both connected, and this way she can adjust it to whatever she wants. And now I am sewing the sleeve to the bodice, which I actually did later on in the process, but to just make it simpler for y'all watching, I'm putting the clip in here. And as you can see, I just lost my thread again. Yay! So yeah, stitching, I had to gather the sort of the base of my sleeve, you could say, so then it would fit to the armhole, which was the instructions. It gives this nice little poof. And the best thing with this is you'll see that because I'm using like a Bertha collar thing, it can go right over the top of the sleeve, so if they're unevenly gathered, it's all okay and it all looks fine. Which is actually nice because it's really hard to get your sleeve evenly gathered and then sewn evenly too. Okay, now it is time to move on to the collar. And this was actually kind of a fun thing to make, to watch it all come together. And I am sewing two different of the collar pieces together. And by I mean by collar, I do not mean something that sits close to your throat. This is like a Bertha collar. So I'm stitching those pieces together, and I'm just showing you where I've sewn them and then gathered them, and that adds the prettiest sort of ruching effects. And these are my two front pieces of the collar that I just weirdly laid on my dress form because I think it looks like some sort of something a soldier would wear. But on to more realistic things. After a little bit of deliberation, trying to figure out exactly what I'm doing with the lace, I'm just lying it on the front of my collar. It actually goes on all around the collar. It adds this lovely detail. Very, very pretty. And so that's exactly what I'm doing here, just pinning it right onto the collar. And now I am attaching right sides together my, because there's two different parts. There's like the collar that you see, and then there's like the collar behind it. I'm not explaining it very well, but now that I see the footage, I remember that. So like the skinny collar, you don't really see actually. It like backs it and gives it a shape. So it's the gathered places, the ruching, I want to call it, the ruched collar that you're going to be seeing. But you will see the lace as well. And I'm just pinning back the lace so I accidentally don't stitch it in the seam, which I ended up doing. And I am pinning the other side of this collar down. And taking that to the machine. And like I said, if you're doing this dress, really try not to catch the lace in the narrow part, but if you do, just take out your stitches and redo them. I mean, it's not the end of the world. So yeah, you can just see me stitching that on my very messy sewing table, and then stitching the other side down. And I finally secured in this footage what I wanted my gathers to look like. So now I'm just stitching down the end of them so they're not going to get any bigger. These are the gathers that are sort of in the center of it, so I have to secure them before I flip it out. So that's what I'm doing in this footage right here. And now I am just securing the gathers on this edge of my collar. And now I've taken a needle and thread and I'm just stitching this ruche to the seam below it that corresponds. So it's gonna behave, and I want it to stay in place. So that's pretty much, I'm just anchoring it to the thing behind it, so it's not gonna like bubble out weirdly. It'll more like sit prettily, ruchely. So, I mean, they said to do this like basting stitch on the machine, but the way I gathered it, it just wasn't going to work. So I mean, a needle and thread was actually sort of fun at this point. Okay, it's back to the machine, sewing the collar together where it's gonna meet in the front. I did not sew the lace yet, and I ended up sewing that down a little bit later. And now it was time for the belt, I want to call it, but it wasn't really the belt because it was attached to the bodice. But it's just this like very nice detail that I didn't think I was going to have, because I forgot to cut it out in the beginning. So I had to cut it out a little bit later. And pretty much it's generally what you do. It's a very long rectangle that you sew and then flip inside out. But actually in this case, I don't think I ended up flipping it inside out. Just watch and see. So then I took that right to the machine, stitched down the end so it wasn't going to sort of run away on me, and then started stitching down the flat part of it. Okay, I actually remember now, I did not flip it inside out like you would first think. I pinned it right against the bodice, so I'm going to flip it down. So sort of like matching up the seams, matching up the rough cut seams so they're both going to fold down, and it just adds this little detail, this little sort of break between the bodice and the skirt that actually looks very nice. And so I'm glad I did it. Okay, and now I am attaching the back of my collar to the back of the bodice, and at first I'm just attaching it to the corresponding yellow fabric. I'm not sewing through all thicknesses on the bodice with this. And now I'm just sewing that down. As you can see, I've flipped out the lining and the boning is making it look very odd just behind the sewing machine, like hanging there. And now it's back to that connection, and after I've sewn it to my outer bodice piece, I am just flipping everything inside out and pinning it down on those sides. So I'm just going to take that to my machine. After I sew that down, I will flip it right side out and you will not be able to see the connection. So it's actually really, really cool how that all goes. Just popping in to say, if you really like this video, please give it a like. Let me know in the comments any questions you guys have. I'd love to hear from you. It's just a huge encouragement. And yeah, subscribe. Please subscribe. I'm always welcoming new followers. It's just fun, awesome journey. If you subscribe, yeah. So stick around. There's a lot more stuff coming. Thanks.